So it is interesting why he changed his tactic. Something made him feel pressured to do that. And Fabrice kind of got into this a little bit. Maybe this was to play with Donald Trump's mind as well.
Let's talk about what's been going on between Russia and Ukraine in, well, I was about to say the last 24 hours, but these things move so quickly. Really, it was only a few hours ago. We heard about Russia alleging that Ukraine had been planning an attack on President Putin personally. Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, has said that his country has already determined how it will respond to this alleged Ukrainian attempt to attack President Putin's residence. The Kremlin has also confirmed that Putin has now held a phone call with Donald Trump in which the American leader was allegedly shocked when he was told about this supposed Ukrainian drone attack. Moscow has been saying it's going to revise its negotiating position in response. Ominous words as we have the peace talks that have just completed yesterday between Presidents Trump and Zelensky, with the American leader suggesting that Ukraine's actions demonstrated that the country's willingness to end the conflict was comparable to the feeling in Russia.
I can say that I believe Ukraine has made some very strong attacks also. And I don't say that negatively. I think you probably have to. I don't say that negatively, but I think, and he doesn't tell me that, but there have been some explosions in various parts of Russia, and it looks to me like, I don't know, I don't think it came from the Congo. I don't think it came from the United States of America. It possibly came from Ukraine, but I haven't asked that question. Maybe I won't bother asking. No, they haven't.
President Trump speaking yesterday. As always, your views welcome. You can WhatsApp us 0333 003 2353, or you can text us 87222. Start your message with the word Times. Simon in Chelmsford has done that and says, Ollie, if Trump believes the absurd claim by Russia about the alleged attack on Putin's home, then he's even more stupid than I thought. Putin is playing his usual game and making a fool of Trump, as if he needed any help. In my view, the USA should immediately give Ukraine the Tomahawk missiles and cease any further contact with the Russians until they call a ceasefire. Well, I've got three fantastic guests coming up to discuss all of that. Let's start with Igor Novikov, former advisor to President Zelensky on US relations. Hi there, Igor.
Hi, Ollie. Hi.
Hello. What's your view, just initially as a reaction to this news that, Russia is accusing Ukraine of attempting to attack President Putin's residence? Because it is something that Ukraine would be capable of, isn't it?
Well, that's the funny part of this. If we ever wanted to destroy some of Putin's sheds or buildings or attack him, probably we're capable technologically, but the choice of that Novgorod residence, which he hardly ever visits, is hilarious. So it points to the false flag. Also, the fact that the timing of this, and last but not least, is like it doesn't make any sense for us to do that. I mean, we've just had a productive meeting with President Trump. President Trump is not, emotional or angry with Ukraine, and we go and attack some irrelevant residents. So unless Putin's just installed an oil refinery there, I believe it's lies.
Yeah, I was speaking earlier to a Ukrainian MP who positioned a similar point, essentially that this is an excuse so that you don't have to say, from Russia's point of view, directly to President Trump, we're rejecting your peace talk.
Well, it is. I mean, it screams false flag, and I've called the president's office. I've asked him, this attack hasn't happened. But the real tragedy of this is this was actually a psychological operation that Putin played against President Trump, and what we've heard from the Russians so far seems to point to the fact that it might have worked. Trump apparently is shocked and angry that we attack some irrelevant shed. And, for the guy who still thinks that Crimea is a historically Russian island, I wouldn't be surprised he falls for it.
Let's bring in Fabrice Pothier, former director of NATO policy planning. Hi there, Fabrice.
Hi, how are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. What's your reaction both to what the Russians are alleging and what Igor was saying there in response?
I think I would largely agree with Igor that this has all the smell of a false flag operation coming at a very convenient time for President Putin when he basically has been cornered by the quite active Ukrainian and European diplomacy to come forward to President Trump with a consolidated peace plan, taking into account his initial points, but taking into account obviously some important points for the Ukrainians and the Europeans. And it was really now the table was being turned on Moscow. And I think the best way to respond to that is to pretend that, in fact, Ukraine is not in for peace. They are attacking even the leader of Russia. And therefore, that whole peace conversation is null. So I do think the false flag operation is the most likely. And it reveals one simple thing, that even if we're not talking about false flag, I think there is no indication whatsoever that President Putin is interested in any sort of reasonable peace resolution and peace negotiation. And he has signaled things very clearly the past few weeks about some very, very intransigent red lines from the Russian side, making a negotiation impossible. So I think it just reinforced a position that was already there in Moscow, but obviously he's playing the KGB tactics with Trump's mind, like the previous interview he said.
Yeah, although, I mean, maybe it reveals something else as well, which is who's involved in these conversations. I mean, again, we're seeing, Zelensky being the only European that's, I mean, at least he's involved in the conversation, but being the only European that's standing there on the podium next to Trump. And then this line from Russia. Where's Europe on this, Fabrice? Once again, just absent from the conversation.
I would not amplify the Russian disinformation speaking points. I think the visit of President Zelensky, the negotiation he has just had with President Trump, are largely the result of very intensive back and forth between Kiev and key European partners, who have shaped this 20-point peace plan over the past few weeks to reflect again the critical points for Ukraine, but also the critical points for Europe, because ultimately Europe is going to own this or co-own this with Ukraine. So I think I would not underestimate the Europeanness in what President Zelensky brought to Mar-a-Lago today. And second, as you know, there was a debrief from President Trump and President Zelensky to some key European leaders. And there will be also a follow-up meeting of the coalition of the willing hosted by President Macron. So I think Europe is active. The question, however, where you're right, is Europe willing to put much more skin in the game that is not just diplomatic skin, which is actually working and saving the day every 3 or 4 months for Ukraine, but is it willing to put more skin in the game militarily and security-wise to really stabilize and offer a long-term future to a sovereign independent Ukraine? I think that's the key question.
And I know it's a rhetorical question, Fabrice, but the answer is no, isn't it?
I think the answer is more yes than no. Not the whole of Europe. That's why we're talking about a coalition of the willing, mostly led by the UK and France. But the reality is that they are unwilling to do the last few steps unless they get also some US reassurance that the US will cover their back. So in a way, the Europeans are more willing to cover Ukraine's back, but at the condition that the US is also more willing to cover Europe's back and Ukraine's back should something dramatic happen. So I think that's where we are, and we've been for the past few months now.
Okay, Fabrice, I know you've got to go. It's a busy festive season. I appreciate your time.
Very much.
Thank you. Fabrice Pothier there, former director of NATO policy planning. Igor Novikov is still with me, but I also want to bring in Jim Townsend now. We're spoiled for guests on this very important subject, former US Assistant Secretary for NATO and Europe under Barack Obama. Hi there, Jim.
Hi, good to see you.
Good to see you again. Listening to all of this, does your instinct agree with both our callers today that have sent us messages and both guests that I've just spoken to that this is a false flag? Like Zelensky says, Russia is lying about this plot to assault one of Putin's residences.
Absolutely. I find it hard to add anything more to what has already been said. But a couple things are of interest. One is they always bring out Lavrov when they're going to say something that is obviously a lie or some type of maneuver. It's Lavrov who delivers that to the cameras. So whenever you see him up there, you know something's coming your way. And the second thing is, why did he feel he even needed a false flag? He's very good at saying, sorry, but I can't live with this draft. I can't live with these points. Why does he feel he needs an excuse? Why does he feel he needs to explain why by creating a false flag and say, well, based on what's happened, I can't agree to this. So it is interesting why he changed his tactic. Something made him feel pressured to do that. And Fabrice kind of got into this a little bit. Maybe this was to play with Donald Trump's mind as well. So, some interesting things.
And okay, what Lavrov did say is that Russia is now set to, quote, change its negotiating position. What do you think that actually means then in concrete terms?
Well, I mean, certainly their negotiating position has been no. No, except for what we want, and we want the Donbas and this type of thing. So changing it, well, for sure, it's not going to go in the other direction. It's not going to be on making any concessions. So, I can't imagine what that's going to mean. But I did think that it could be not necessarily in terms of the negotiations, but maybe it's in terms of the military strikes going on in the cities. Maybe what's going to change is who they target. Maybe they're going to try to target Zelensky. Maybe they're going to try to target more of the government buildings downtown Kyiv. Maybe they're going to amp up their violence in terms of the strikes. I don't know, but in terms of specifically their negotiating tactics, I just can't believe what more they would do to strangle these talks.
And Igor, that must be the fear in Ukraine. That this isn't just about the narrative for President Trump. This is about the narrative for Russians, so that they can say, well, look, they were going to attack us first, and that's why we've, increased our targeted attacks on Kyiv.
Well, Ollie, that doesn't scare us too much because, first of all, I mean, coming from the guy who has missiles overflying his house like every other day or so, and drones, there's nothing we haven't seen there before. They've attacked the building of the Cabinet of Ministers in Kyiv. And, attacks against government buildings don't give them much. And I haven't seen any like red line Russia hasn't already crossed. So I think what we have here, apart from, the psyop against President Trump, is also the fact that they need to explain the festive season bombings, which they've prepared in advance. We have intelligence that they will happen, and they usually happen every year. So they need to explain it at the time when there are negotiations and those negotiations are actually going somewhere. So they need to kind of explain the pictures that will hit TVs, roughly around New Year's Day. So that's what's going on there. Are we scared? No, but obviously we need to be vigilant.
I mean, thank you for, bringing us down to earth with what it feels like living there. Are people in Ukraine paying attention to the diplomacy? Or at the moment, is there such cynicism along the lines that you're expressing that it doesn't seem to match reality? What's the point of listening?
Well, there's obviously some false hope for Christmas miracles. So every time Zelensky and Trump meet, especially since it was the first meeting in Florida, I mean, there was a bit of hope on the ground, but that hope usually is coming from people who are not familiar with what's going on. I mean, the realistic assessment by anyone in the know in Kiev is that the window of opportunity for real peace talks will open around the end of February or early March. So if this war ends, or if there's a sustainable ceasefire, I will be very surprised if we see it before spring.
And I know we've got to let you go now, Igor, because there's a blackout, right, in 1 minute's time. Just tell us about that. Is that a daily occurrence now?
Well, I can stay with you until they switch off my electricity. Yeah, well, they've gotten worse in Kiev, where I am, obviously because of the last strike. I mean, some parts of Kiev are still without electricity, roughly 72 hours in. I do have a generator, so I mean, it doesn't concern me as much. But once again, I mean, people have learned to live with it. Odessa got it really badly a few weeks ago, so people were without running water, heat, or electricity there for a few days. But once again, it's nearly year 4 of this war. We've seen it all before. Nobody, nobody's concerned about the drama of it. So everyone is really cynical and pragmatic, and people are resilient in terms of not giving in to Putin's demands, because the fear on the ground is that if we agree to withdraw from Donbass, they're going to examine the contents of Putin's, suitcase that his assistant carries. From every washroom around the world after his visits. They'll examine it, they'll say that Ukraine tried to poison him with some spoiled yogurt or something, and they'll use it as casus belli to kind of keep going. So nobody believes that Putin wants peace unless pressured. And I'm one of those people as well.
Okay, well, got that loud and clear. Igor, I will let you go just in case you do suddenly drop off thanks to the blackout and then you worry all of our listeners. I want to make sure you can properly shut down that computer, but I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was Igor Novikov there, former advisor to President Zelensky on US relations. Jim Townsend, former US Assistant Secretary for NATO and Europe under Barack Obama, is still with me. And Jim, what do you think will happen next in terms of Trump's inner processing of this? Because both our guests there sort of suggested this is about mind games with him. Are his sympathies about to flip-flop back to Russia?
Well, I'm not sure his sympathies have ever left Russia too far. I know that every now and then he says something that sounds like he's going to turn up the pressure, and of course he doesn't. He'll get a phone call from Putin and change his mind. So I don't see him moving closer to putting pressure on. I mean, I would have expected to have heard something today, maybe, that he was upset with the state of discussions with Putin. He's been on the phone now with him a number of times. He keeps saying that there's progress. So I don't see him changing in terms of his views towards Zelensky, pointing the finger at him. I think it's it seems like we're in neutral, that we've had these meetings and our vehicle here is just in neutral. It hasn't moved forward and it hasn't moved backwards. They're going to meet again in January, and I don't know what they're going to talk about. If they're 90% there, what are those thorny problems? And remember, these are negotiations between Ukraine and the U.S., with the U.S. carrying the water for the Russians, and trying to get Zelensky to move closer to something that the Russians find acceptable. So I'm sure there's work to do on something creative in terms of the Donbas territory. There's no willingness on Zelensky's side to give it up. He'll go as far as an economic area, but I don't think that's going to be something Putin's going to live with. So they've got something really tough to figure out, and I think it's going to be just like watching a tennis match. The ball is going to go back and forth over the net.
Tennis match that we've been watching very sadly for a little too long. Jim, pleasure always to have you on the show. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.